So we'll stand for the invocation if that's okay. Unless you would like to stand, you can do that too. But you can sit through the music. And our music is going to be by, welcome everybody, by the way. It's a good day because Jane Davis just told me for the first time in 2 years, the doors to Landmark are unlocked. So for those of you that want to visit or will soon be moving in, you can get in. So there you go. Anyway, today is, our music will be by Kate Loeb, and she is going to be not only introducing, but performing, but it'll be on Zoom. So with that, we have our fearless tech team down here there it is, and there she is. She's very quiet today.
My name is Kate Loeb, and for today's music, I've chosen a little song that I learned in elementary school, which was meant to help us learn the Pledge of Allegiance. So, I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I perhaps should have had you stand for that, so I didn't realize that was it. But if you'd like to stand now for the invocation by Corey Gibson.
Yeah, I know. I thought you would. I actually I had this whole thing planned because President's Day just passed, and I was going to do this whole thing about unity, but I woke up this morning. And I saw a video. I saw footage of families hiding in their homes as jets were flying over. And, where we are at right now geopolitically is a very dangerous place that we haven't been globally in a long time. And right now, as we're sitting here, there are people that are living with a country that's currently being invaded. So what I thought we should do today is take a moment and just have a moment of silence for the people that are in Ukraine. Just imagine how terrifying and scary that is for them. And let us hope that that this can be resolved quickly with very little death. So maybe just a moment of silence. All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Again, welcome. We have a number of guests today, which include Brian Dodge, who's a guest of Quinn Dolan. Hey, way down there. Kathleen Wilms, guest of Russ Mazzola. Monica, guest of Felix Rifa, I think. Supposed to be, anyway. Well, moving right along. Jessica Garcia. Hi there. Yay. She's the mother of one of our exchange students, which is great. Aaron Ruff, guest of Rick Fairbrook. Hey. Anthony Peterson, guest of Adriana Gardner. Over there, here we go. And Clark Pearman, guest of Dave Brown. Hey. Welcome all, and membership applications, of course, are at the front table. So we have one of our favorite things to do today. We get to present a blue badge to one of the fastest persons through Rotary Education, known to man, Andy Webb. Are you here today, Andy? Yes, she is. There she is. She just got to sit through our Rotary board meeting last week. Maybe I could use Never know how I could use that. Hey, thank you very much. Today's a great anniversary, too, for Rotary, and Daryl Blue will give a presentation about the birthday of Rotary International.
A 117 years ago, Rotary was founded, and I wanted to tell you a little bit about what happened on that particular. In Chicago, there was a young attorney named Paul Harris, who was actually born in Racine, Wisconsin, raised in Hampshire by his grandparents, and sort of was a lonely kind of guy in Chicago. A big city that was not really accustomed to them. So, sure. A little better? Okay. So Paul organized a group of his friends to talk about an idea that he had for forming a club. His idea was that this club would be a group of business people who would talk about their business relationships and do business with each other. And he decided to go to dinner with a friend, Sylvester Sheely. They went to Madame Galley's Bohemian restaurant in downtown Chicago and had a spaghetti dinner. And then they walked over to the Unity building, which was a few blocks away, to join with a couple of other friends to talk about this idea he had for a new club. At the Unity building, they gathered in room 711, which was the office of Gustavus Lohr, who was a friend of Paul's. And that room has been preserved today at Rotary International headquarters in Evanston, Illinois. In 1989, when the building was raised, a group of Rotarians saved much of what was in that room. I think the furnishings are probably period pieces and not necessarily original to the room, but if you're ever in Evanston and want to see where Rotary began, you can drop in and see room 711. Well, Paul's friends all represented different occupations. There were only 4 of them at that very first meeting, and the person on the far left is Gus Lohr, whose office they met in. Next was, and he was a mining engineer. Next to him, that's second from the left, is Sylvester Sheely, who had that spaghetti dinner with Paul, and he was a coal dealer. The next is Hiram Shorey, who was a merchant tailor, and he had been a friend of Hiram's, of Gus Lohr's. And Paul is the guy on the far right, Paul Harris. So I did have their occupations there. The next meeting was held only a couple of weeks later, and they were joined by a man who's known as the 5th Rotarian, Harry Ruggles, and he was a publisher or a printer. The idea that Paul had was that they would rotate the meeting location among their various offices, and that led to the name Rotary for this organization. So they rotated their business locations. Harry loved to sing, and so he introduced singing to Rotary. He actually was a commercial printer, and he printed the first Rotary songbook, and I have a copy of that in my collection. 1925, the first Rotary songbook was published by the 5th Rotarian, Harry Ruggles. Well, Rotary grew fairly quickly after that. After the chartering in 1905, 3 years later, the second Rotary Club was chartered in San Francisco, California, and later in that same year, the Oakland Club was chartered. The Oakland Club only lasted a short period of time, but the San Francisco Club is still in existence. Then, push this button a little more. In 1909, the 4th Rotary Club in Seattle was chartered, and they call themselves Seattle 4 to this very day. And that was the club that chartered our club for us. Later that same year, the 5th Club was chartered in 1909 in New York City. And then, within a very short period of time, December the 1st, 1919, the finest Rotary Club in the world, thank you, Craig, was chartered in Yakima, Washington. The chartering meeting and the original meeting was held in the Commercial Hotel, which is a building still over there on Yakima Avenue. This group of gentlemen were the founders of our club. On October the 27th of that year, they gathered over there in the commercial hotel to talk about whether or not they should charter a Rotary Club. Turns out they decided it would be a good idea, and about half of the members, about half of the people you see in that picture eventually became Rotarians, although they weren't all members of the very first meeting. There was a requirement that there be 25 members to charter a Rotary Club at that time, and so they were joined by other folks. We know every name except one of the people in the picture, and all, I would say about half of them eventually became Rotarians. The front row on the far left was the Rotary Club's first secretary. His name was O.C. Suits, Orpheus C. Suits. So, Carolyn, he started the tradition of executive directors, being the first club secretary. W.A. Bell, who was our first president, is not in that picture. We know who he was. Well, Rotary today, worldwide, is comprised of about 36,000 plus clubs with 1.4 million members. That includes Rotaractors, who are now considered to be Rotarians themselves. So I would just like to say a good, happy anniversary to Rotary. There you go.
Thank you, Daryl. It's always interesting to know music was important because this club also had a guest speaker or a guest of one of the members in the 1920s, some years after, by the name of Jess Barber. And when they did the singing at the beginning, he was so well noted for his wonderful baritone voice that he was immediately signed up as a member the same day. And he became the kind of the unofficial choir master for our Rotary Club here for quite a long time. He worked for the Barnes Wooden department store, which eventually merged into Bon Marché. And you'll be happy to know, Carolyn, that first secretary was only secretary for a short period of time because he transferred out of town as soon as he could. No, I don't know if that's true, but he wasn't here 2 years, yes. All right, as you know, February is Black History Month, and we are delighted again to honor that month with a speaker who speaks about their experiences and whatnot in the African American community. And today we have the kind of the shining star of the community, Esther Huey.
Good afternoon, fellow Rotarians. Thank you all. And somebody, they told me 5 minutes. Somebody. Oh, okay. Hey, I've been really very happy with how Rotary has been involved in Black History activities this year. Partnerships with cooperating with others to bring you the history and bring you up to date on where we are as African American people in the world. And we have had some good discussions. I really give kudos to the ad hoc committee because we have had an intensive month where we had intensive discussions and brought about a new awareness and new needs and new thoughts when it comes to racism and some of the injustices that African Americans have experienced and continue to experience. And I've been proud to be part of that and very proud of took this on. So I wanted to be sure I expressed my appreciation that we as a Rotary Club came to the realization that we should be involved in those activities that promote justice throughout the country. So thank you, Rotarians. I don't think I need to say much about my background and my experiences because they've been plastered all over Yakima. So I won't even go into that except to say that I am a part of you students of history who have studied about the Great Migration to the North, when African American people came to the North for better opportunities, themselves, for their children, and for others. I'm a part of history in many ways, but that was probably one of the most significant activities of my life. And the thing that I remember most about that, all of the Pullman porters on the train that brought us to Yakima from Arkansas were African American, and that was the first Pullman porter I'd ever seen. But when we got on the train, had to sit in the back of the train because it was not an integrated train. And when we got about halfway across the Mississippi River, the Pullman porter came back and told us that we could now go to the dining car because we had crossed the Mason-Dixon line. So that's a part of history too. I say those things because I lived through a lot of history that was indigenous to African Americans and the progress we've made over the years, 400 years, toward freedom. But those things stick in my mind, and I've always remembered those. First thing that we saw when we got off the train in the Yakima Depot, we crossed the street and there was a restaurant. It's 1946. There was a restaurant that had a big sign on it that said, "No colors allowed." And we told our mother how disappointed we were because she had promised us we wouldn't see that again. But it was right there, very prominent. And every time I go down Front Street, I see that building and I think about that sign that was on that building. Those things make an impact. I tell you that because most people don't realize how painful it is, how humiliating it is, some of the things that we as African Americans have experienced and continue to experience. And sometimes one wonders why we're so intense and why we get hurt so easily. The hurt is deeper for us because it's a continuous stream of experiences that tell us that perhaps we are not first-class citizens. So we're working toward that and are helping us to accomplish that, to get farther down the road than where we thought we would. First priority going forward, we've had some good activities in the past. There are some things that still need to be done. I have some priorities, personal. I don't know if I'll get to accomplish all of them. I'm getting ready to be. But perhaps I will get to accomplish some of them. I want to talk to you about my first priority, and it's still to have a swimming pool for the youth on the east side of Yakima. We were promised a swimming pool when they closed the 2 swimming pools, and we lobbied, we literally begged them not to close the swimming pools, but in closing them, we were promised that we would have a replacement pool on the east side. It has not been accomplished yet, and I want to tell you that that is number one priority for me going forward, is to get that swimming pool started on the east side of Yakima. And Eric Silvers and I have been lobbying our legislators and everybody else that we could to try to figure out where that money is going to come from to have that pool. Those children on the east side deserve that kind of amenity. That's a quality of life thing, that's a social thing, and I think it's just an injustice that they do not have a pool to enjoy on that side. The other thing about that park is the bathrooms. This past June, when we celebrated one of our most important celebrations, Juneteenth, I had to get in the car and go down the street to a friend's house to use the restroom. That's not good. So we still have some work to do, and that's going to be one of my priority and one of Eric's priorities going forward. And we're really working hard on that. So if you can put a good word in for us. And the other thing that I'm going to be involved in is voter registration. I'm really disenchanted with the voter suppression that's going on. We have 28 states right now who are trying to enact laws to suppress the vote. And that is a result of the huge turnout of African Americans that put Biden in the office. And I really am going to be very, very concerned about that, because we need to turn that around. If we're not sitting at the table when decisions are made that impact our lives, we are not going to ever accomplish what it is we set out. So that's going to be, you'll hear me with that. And you've heard me for years, so these are my New Year's promises to you. Okay, and then need to continue to advocate for our youth here in Yakima. In whatever way we can, we need to save our youth. We need to stop losing the African American population in Yakima. In the 60s, we were 16% of the population here in Yakima. Today, 0.5%. Why are they leaving? We leaving? For better opportunity, social justice, more adequate health care, more wealth, better jobs. Just the quality of life that you can leave Yakima and go to another city and experience. We want that here. We want that for our children, and we want our children involved in decisions that impact the lives of Yakima. And we want to stop the violence that we see with our young people now. So our youth, in whatever way we can do it. And that will. I'm concerned about our best and brightest, and some of your best and brightest, making the decision to leave Yakima because the quality of life is not available. And then I probably have thought, if I were younger, I would run for it, because the representation is not quite right now. So I will be working on encouraging those people who have the ability to become involved in the political life of Yakima, because unless you're involved, the power is in politics. There's no need to say it any other way. And the power is in the vote. So those two things are going to be very important as we go forward. And the other thing that I want to say to you is, this year was the best Black history involvement that this Rotary Club has had. And we want to be sure that that's continued. So I would ask you to continue that also. Next year, we've already identified a speaker for Rotary. He is former 37th Seattle legislator, and he was the author, if you will, with working with Governor Booth Gardner to establish the first Martin Luther King birthday holiday celebration for the state of Washington. And he's been active ever since then, and we have gotten a commitment from him that he will come and speak to you at the next Black History. And I'm excited about that. He was our first speaker for the Martin Luther King holiday celebration here in Yakima over at Syrian Church. And he has been in our politics ever since. So I'm sure you'll enjoy what he has to say and his involvements in the movement for justice. It's Can I just read this one thing that I wanted to leave with you? And this is from Martin Luther King. There is nothing in all the world greater than freedom. It's worth paying for. It's worth losing a job for. It's worth going to jail for. I would rather be a free pauper than a rich slave. I would rather die in abject poverty with my convictions than live in inordinate riches with the lack of self-respect. Dr. Martin Luther King. Thank you.
And since we just were talking about Martin Luther King's birthday, you may have heard that Esther has a birthday coming up too. And with that, Charlie.
And again, being mindful of all of our COVID protocols, please don't sing along out loud, but do sing along in your heart as we sing, "Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Esther. Happy birthday.
You will notice we have cupcakes out there today. Esther, you'll have to put your own candles in them, but that's what they're for. So happy birthday, Esther. Now with our Sergeant at Arms, we have Mr. Rob Phillips.
Thank you, John. Well, in order, Sergeant at Arms members, you don't need to stand up quite yet because we'll do the fining at the end of this little presentation. But in honor of our program today with our bright young exchange students, I thought maybe we should talk about other types of education. And as I thought about it, I thought, well, why don't we talk about mine? And my start to school here in the Yakima Valley was pretty uneventful. And unlike many of you, there was no kindergarten in the Yakima School District in early 1960s, so I didn't go to kindergarten. My education was go out and play. I wasn't very well prepared for school. My parents were busy having kids. You can see my mom there was pregnant with my little sister. We had 5 kids under 7 years old at that time. So there was not a lot of Robbie, learn your alphabet, Robbie, use your numbers, Robbie, this or that. It was just go out and play. So then first grade school, okay, you go to school. I dressed up in my nicest little shirt. My mom marched me down to Mrs. Stoddard's classroom at H.M. Gilbert. And again, some would say I probably wasn't very well prepared for that, naively. And I learned quickly I wasn't. The first day of school, Stoddard said, does anyone know how to spell apple? And I thought, who would know how to spell apple? I couldn't even spell cat. Mark Lemke, do you know any of you know Mark Lemke? Raised his hand. A-P-P-L-E. He's a genius. Who knows how to spell apple? I didn't know how to spell apple. So anyway, some of you might recognize this. This was our first grade reader. It was the first and one of only about 4 books I read until I was in high school. But I did eventually learn how to read. So then we'd do art. And I don't know if any of you remember this, but this isn't the right picture, but it was the only one I could find. They handed us a box of crayons. I remember it was black on the bottom, purple on top. The crayons were as big as this thing right here. Little teeny first grade hands. Half of it was flat. They weren't sharp. And how do you color with those? I didn't quite understand it. The first parent-teacher conference, Mrs. Stoddard says, Mrs. Phillips, Robbie can't color between the lines. He can't stay between the lines. Well, nobody could stay between the lines with those things. So I brought a knife and I sharpened my crayon. And by golly, I showed him how to color. So next was arithmetic. Does anybody recognize those? They were colored rods. Some genius decided that the best way for kids to learn how to do math was with these rods. And I didn't understand it. I never did understand it. Robbie, what does a blue rod and red rod add up to? Well, blue was 5, red was 1. What does blue and red add up to? I said purple. I didn't understand. So I fell behind there too. So, of course, the favorite time in first grade was recess. And Gilbert had a jungle gym, not unlike this one, implanted in concrete, as was the monkey bars. And again, I was dumb, but I wasn't stupid. And I watch kids fall off of those things about once a week, break a wrist, chip a tooth, bloody nose. So I stayed off of all those. But I did like recess enough that, we'd go out and play. A lot of times we'd play Army or Cops and Robbers. Of course, you had to use guns, when you were doing that. Now that would be totally looked down upon, but we did it. And then one day, I got mad at somebody for something. They got kicked or something. And I said, damn it. And holy smokes. One of the kids heard me. Actually, it was the fat kid. Back in those days, there was only one fat kid in class. You didn't have 30 like they do now, or 40. It was just one fat. The fat kid heard me say, damn it, and ran in and told on me. So after lunch, would Robbie Phillips come to the principal's office? Well, I'd never been to the principal's office before. Mr. Ritchie was his name. And he knew my grandpa, who was a superintendent out in Natchez, and he had an apple orchard. And we started a long discussion, philosophical discussion about apples and what happened to apples if they went bad, if they spoiled. And he said they'd be thrown out, right? Yeah, I guess I'd never seen a rotten apple in any of my grandpa's stuff, so I didn't know. And I never did quite understand what he was trying to get at until I was probably in high school or something. I was thinking about that time, and I'm going, oh, I get it. I was going to get thrown out, but I didn't. But anyway, as I was walking out the door, he said, now, Robbie, he says, are we going to say damn it anymore? And I said, hell no, and I got out of there. So anyway, that was my start to an illustrious educational career. And so I just wanted to pay $1, no, only $2 total, but pay $1 if you had the privilege of attending kindergarten. Well, some of us didn't. Or you could spell apple in the first grade. I couldn't. If you read Tip and Mitten as your first grade primer, pay $1. If you didn't have to use big, fat, dull crayons, you can pay $1. If you learned math the old-fashioned way with numbers and not with rods, colored rods, pay $1. Or if you fell off the monkey bars or jungle gym, you can pay $1. Or if you got sent to the principal's office like I did, you can pay $1. Yeah. Sure. Yeah. I don't know. Dave, didn't you go to Gilbert? You had Mrs. Stoddard too? So there's a few of us in there. She was very patient with me, I'll tell you. So thank you.
After hearing who that particular teacher had for students, I'm not surprised she retired the next year. But anyway, as our program is getting underway, which will be introduced by Rebecca Pinnell, you'll begin to see some students come onto the Zoom. That's some of the people who will be participating, and they will be entering on, so don't be surprised to see that. But with that, our Youth Exchange program is one of the hallmarks, and unfortunately we haven't been able to do that recently, but Rebecca Pinnell is going to introduce today.
Afternoon. That discussion reminded me of the one time I got sent to the principal's office, so don't tell, but I got sent to the principal's office in band class for teaching the whole band how to play Smurfs, Smurfs theme song. We all broke out in the Smurfs song in the middle of practice, and the band teacher was not happy. That was my experience. So I'm so thrilled to say that Youth Exchange is back and to have a discussion today about Youth Exchange. For the past few years, I've served along with Jerry Ketchum as a Youth Exchange officer for the Downtown Rotary Club. But sad to say, since 2020, we haven't had a youth program. We are optimistic that this year is different, and we have some students. today. Before I do that, I thought I would just give you a little background on Youth Exchange. What is Youth Exchange? Some of you have seen our students come in and speak before. The Youth Exchange program is open to students 15 to 18 years of age during their exchange year. Some countries don't. Rotary supports Youth Exchange to promote international understanding and peace, and it is perhaps important we think on that today as we think of international crumbling to a certain extent. One of the reasons why we have Youth Exchange is to have Americans better understand our partners in the world and to have those partners better understand. Our district coordinates with districts from throughout the world to exchange students. So it's not just our club one-on-one exchanging, but we operate as a district and have certain clubs we work with to have students going out, be taken in by clubs throughout the world. We select our students through a process that begins in the fall. They go through a written application, some interviews. They have local interviews here in Yakima, and then they have district interviews to be selected to be Youth Exchange students. The students are given a list of countries that they can preference, but they aren't necessarily given their first choice. We don't exchange with every country in the world, and we exchange with some countries with some pretty obscure languages. So the students may get a country that they're familiar with or may get a brand. So I'd like to introduce you to our students that will be going out next fall that have been selected to go out, as well as some students who have come back. They've already served exchange years, and of course, it's been a couple of years. Our students who are going out, we call outbounds, and our students who have come back, some of whom are on video, we call rebounds. I'd like to start with our outbound students who are by introducing yourselves with your name, where you're at school, your grade, school, club sponsor. It's not just downtown Rotary, it's also Southwest and Sunrise. Actually, some other clubs throughout the district sponsor our going to.
Hello. Hi, my name is John Ballou. I'm an outbound under Southwest Rotary. I'm going to Austria, and I am currently attending Tila High School.
Hi, my name is Natalia. I'm in 10th grade at Davis High School. I'm with the Quincy Rotary, and I'm going to Japan. So.
Hello. Hello. My name is Luke. I am a freshman at Tri-Cities Prep in Pasco, Washington, and I am going to the Netherlands.
Hello. My name is Isabella Ferguson, and I am a junior at West Valley High School. I am with Sunrise, and I will be going to Taiwan.
And I wanted to also introduce our rebounds that are here. We have one rebound in person and then a couple on the video. And if you could let us know your name, what country you went to, when you went, and what club sponsored you. Jay, you want to start?
Hello. So my name is Jay. I was an outbound in the 2019 to 2020 exchange year. I went to Thailand, and I was sponsored by Southwest.
And on video, we've got Hannah and Alexis. Hannah, you want to start?
Sure, yeah, I'm Hannah. I went to Chile on exchange in 2017, 2018, and I was sponsored by Yakima Downtown Club.
Hi everyone, I'm Alexis. I went to Germany 2019 to 2020 and was also sponsored by Yakima Downtown.
Thank you. So I wanted to have a little bit of a discussion with our outbounds. Maybe some of you could say why you want to hope to gain from it, but then I also want to have a discussion with our rebounds. So, John, can you talk about why you?
Yeah, in 2019 to 2020, my sister took exchange to Sweden, and when she came back, she was so thrilled about the experience, and seeing her thrive so much and enjoy it, it was a no-brainer. I was like, I had to go, and she helped me with my application, and here I am.
Natalia, can you talk to us a little bit about why you chose and how do you think youth exchange fits into your?
So I chose Japan because I wanted to go since I was 10, but also my mom was an exchange student in Japan. I'm really looking forward to going to Japan because their fashion influences a lot of what I wear, and I hope to become a fashion designer and a model when I'm older, and I will use a lot of the styles in Japan for my clothing.
Luke, you want to talk to us about what prompted you?
Sure. So, I was like looking on TikTok and all these exchange videos. People look like they're enjoying their life so much. But one of the reasons that I chose the Netherlands specifically is because it has a college that I really want to go to. It's called TU Delftec, and it's an engineering school.
So my father was actually an exchange student with Rotary. He went to Japan, and ever since I was really young, I always loved to ask him stories about it. And once I found out that it was a possibility for me to go, I started working towards becoming an exchange student.
Thank you. Well, we'll get back to you. And I'm just so proud of these students. They've been working really hard on their application. We're excited to go next to be at this spot. Jay, could you talk to us a little bit about your experience? You told us where you were at, but what your living situation was like. What was your lived in like?
So I had a slightly unique circumstance while I was in Thailand. So my host club was in a city called Mahasarikam. It's in like northeastern Thailand. It's kind of like close to the border of Laos. But my host family, they lived in a small village called Kamwang, which was in Galasim province. And so I was about actually like, I want to say roughly like 2.5 hours away from my host club. I was the only one of the inbounds in my group that was in like a small village. Everybody else was usually in like more of the cities in their like hosting provinces and like host clubs and stuff. But I lived with one host family. Generally, they usually keep you with like 2 to 3, depends on the country you're in. But I stayed with one family in my very small town. It wasn't even a town, it was a village. So I lived in a very like rural farming area. So it was definitely a very different experience to here in Yakima. Like I wouldn't say we're like, like the most urban city or anything, but definitely very different. Like, I'd walk outside and there'd be like rice paddies and like people farming and like buffaloes wandering around and stuff. Had to watch out for like snakes and stuff when I'd walk out. So definitely very different experience.
Jay, going to the video, Alexis, can you tell us a little bit about your experience? What type of living situation you were in and your host family?
Yeah, so I lived in a smaller town in the northwest part of Germany. I was about 10 minutes from the Netherlands border. It was a great little town that was small enough that we had to ride our bikes everywhere, but we were about 45 minutes from a bigger city called Münster. I was at the gymnasium, which is like the highest level of high school in Germany. They do high schools a little bit differently. And so we were with a lot of super bright kids, which was super cool. And then the host families, I did live with 3 of them, 3 different families, but because of COVID, I moved to my last house in March and was there for 4 months instead of 3. And yeah, they were all super good. I definitely bonded the most with my last host family just because we weren't able to really go out. And so that was a really unique situation. And then there were 3 exchange students in my town, and we rotated to each other's houses. And because of COVID, me and one of the other exchange students were in the same house for a while, which was also really interesting to be with a host family and another exchange student. So
Hannah, can you share with us? Oh, there you go. Thank you, Lex. Hannah, can you share with us your circumstances?
Yeah, absolutely. So in Chile, I lived in a town called Coquimbo. And it was about 200,000 people, so bigger than Yakima and right next to another big town. So there was plenty, of kind of an urban setting, as well as just going down to the valley about 45 minutes away to a really rural and smaller landscape. So kind of had it all near us, which was really nice. The school I went to was a large school. I guess in Chile they do things a little bit differently, so they don't have it separated into a separate school for high school, elementary, and middle school. It's all one big school, and you progress through the grades and stay at the same school. So I was in the second to last year of high school while I was there, and then their summer is in the middle of the year in December because they're in the southern hemisphere. So halfway through my year, I went to the last year of high school there. My situation was a little bit unique because I had already graduated high school in the States before I went, so I didn't have to worry about, whether I was receiving credits. That made it much more simple. And I did live with one host family throughout my exchange because, as I think it was Jay that said, you don't switch around with certain countries, you just stay in the one. So that was my situation as well.
So we talked a little bit about where you went to on exchange to different countries is not necessarily a country that you've been planning on. In some countries, languages are more difficult than others. Jay, I was wondering if you could talk about your experience with language and how you were able to manage living a year in Asia.
All right. So Thailand was actually my second choice. I'd originally wanted to go to Japan because I'd been studying the language prior to that, and I already had like a pretty good grasp on Japanese. So when I found out I was going to Thailand, it made it a little bit difficult to learn the language purely because there's just not a lot of resources for Thai, especially in the United States. It's not like a really like commonly spoken language. It's not like commonly sought after to learn. So I couldn't just like Rosetta Stone or Duolingo or anything. There was literally nothing for me. So it was really difficult to like start practicing while I was still here in the States. I did what I could, but there's only so much you can do like with just by yourself and like looking at like workbooks or what have you. So I didn't really start the language learning until I actually got to Thailand. So luckily, I was the first exchange student at my school, just the first exchange student in general in my village. So luckily, a lot of the kids wanted to talk to me. I was kind of like a little celebrity for the first few months at my school. So I had like lots of partners. The only problem is they'd often want to like practice their English with me, which makes it difficult when you're trying to learn their language. So what we ended up doing is at my school, I got really close to the language department. So the teachers on their, some of the teachers, like the English teachers would actually, instead of doing like their stuff, like they'd have like, you know how like at schools here, usually teachers will have like one period to like prepare, like a preparation period. So these teachers would rotate throughout the week, and like they'd give up like a preparation period they had in order to give me like a personal lesson that I could then use during like school, and I can practice with my classmates and stuff. So I had that opportunity. Also, where I was in Thailand, so I mentioned I was in the northeastern part, which in Thai they refer to as the Isan, and so I also would learn a little bit of the local dialect. So that kind of complicated things, but also made it fun because I was trying to remember, like, like my friends would use like a word, and I'd be like, I've never learned that one, and they're like, oh, it means this, and I'm like, oh, so that's like the dialect, and like this is standard Thai. So there was a little bit of confusion sometimes with me, but it was nice to just learn both like the Pasaisan and then like the standard Thai. So yeah.
Alexis, I wanted to ask you about school credit. Hannah was talking about how she went on exchange after she'd graduated, but you weren't. So how did you manage school credit while going abroad?
Yeah, so I decided to not try and transfer any credits from school over in Germany, just because I had heard that it was a bit more difficult. I would maybe only get like a sport credit. And I'm very thankful that I didn't end up worrying about that, because when I went, we were at the gymnasium and the ninth graders were at like an 11th or 12th grade level here in the States of learning. And I did not learn the language before I went, which I don't recommend. I mean, I would recommend starting to try and learn, but because I didn't know the language, I wouldn't have been able to really participate in classes. So I focused on learning the language in school. And then when I got home, I looked into being able to take my junior and senior year together. And because of COVID, there are so many online classes now that I was able to come home and do my last 2 years of high school in one. So I graduated with the people, like with my friends back home. So that's a really unique situation, and not everyone is able to do that, but I did not try and transfer any credits from being over in Germany, but I did know people who did that. So definitely possible, but a little bit more stressful when you're already trying to learn the language and meet friends. And for Germany and some other places like Asian countries, the language is just such a huge and like harder piece of it that a lot of thinking needs to go into that. So, yeah.
Thanks. Hannah, I was wondering if you could talk to us about how you dealt with homesickness.
Yeah, I think that homesickness on exchange doesn't really set in for the first, couple of weeks or a couple of months, depending on, of course, on, how fast you meet people and stuff. But when it does hit, it hits pretty hard, because about 2 or 3 months into my exchange, I think it all just kind of hit me at once. And I realized how far I was, and, how nothing about your new world is the same as your old world. And it's pretty overwhelming at times. So I think the biggest thing that helped me was just that early in my exchange, I had met so many people and really made it a point to, create that support network, so that when those feelings of homesickness did come, I was able to talk to people about it. And of course, it's important to stay connected with people back home, but I would definitely recommend trying to make those support networks in your host country, because that's really what exchange is about, is immersing yourself in that new world and relying on, those new relationships.
Jay, I wanted to ask you a little bit about your unique experiences. Alexis talked about being abroad when COVID hit. You were also on exchange that year. Could you tell us about how you found out about the pandemic, how that impacted your exchange year? How did you get home? Can you talk about some of those things?
Yeah. Geographically, Thailand is really close to China. Actually, Thailand gets a lot of Chinese tourists. So in Thailand, the pandemic, it really started being like brought to attention actually in December for us. But it wasn't like super like strict, I want to say probably until January. I was able to go on, so in Thailand, we would have like 3 trips that we would be taken on, and it was kind of like, tourist things, like we got to see the south of Thailand and we got to see the north of Thailand, and we got to like hike a mountain. It was just these like trips we like exchange students got to do to like bond us, that the Rotary set up for us. So it was actually on this 3rd and final trip to the south that it really was like starting to get like very apparent that this wasn't going to be some quick little quick little sickness. It was actually something more serious, because like I remember going on this trip, like my host mom had sent me with a bunch of masks and being like, make sure when you're on the plane wear this. And like at this point there hadn't been a mask mandate or anything, but just Asia in general was already quicker to wearing masks, because that was something they do like anyways when they were sick. So I remember being sent like on this trip with a bunch of masks, and actually a few days before the trip was over, we like checked into one of our hotels, and we all had to take out our passports and our visas and prove that we hadn't just come to the country, that we'd already been there for an extended period of time, because they weren't allowing any foreigners who had recently traveled like anywhere, like you would have been sent home. So from there, I went back to Kamlung, and I was with my host family, and schools quickly started to shut down for me. Luckily, for me, it was pretty close to the end of term there, because they start at different times than our schools do here. So I want to say like it ended in February, like my school did, and I just stayed home, really, because all the provinces and everything, they completely shut borders down, so there was no travel at all. And I want to say it was probably about March, so things were starting to get more serious here in the States, and a lot of families were rushing to get kids home because borders were rapidly closing. I actually wasn't able to leave Thailand until May. My original date is I was going to be coming back like late July, but my mom was like worried about me because I was so far away, and so she was pushing for me to leave earlier. But it was kind of scary because like we'd book a flight and it would immediately like be canceled like within the next day or so. And at one point, like, because I was gonna originally, like, my connection was through Taiwan, but then Taiwan completely cut access to all foreign travel, so then, like, I couldn't go there, and then all the domestic airports in Thailand shut down, so I couldn't even get to the airport, I couldn't drive to the airport, I couldn't even, like, fly out, and so luckily things started opening up a little bit back in May so that they could get, like, all the, foreigners in Thailand who wanted to leave and return to their home country. They were allowing some travel for that, but it was very limited, and it was a very long process. I think it was like 2 straight days of traveling for me to get home. And so the pandemic definitely like cut things short, and it was scary getting back and everything. So
Glad you got that. We just have a couple minutes left, and I want to give an opportunity for our outbounds to ask some questions of the rebound. So maybe we can go down the line, starting with John. If you can just direct your question to one of them, and we'll hopefully get each of you the opportunity to ask a question and answer.
What was it like coming back to the high school? Because I know a few people have like brought this to my attention of coming back and being a grade lower, and like the people that you viewed as being the grade lower, now you're in the same class as them. And I just think that might be an interesting experience. I'm just curious as to how that felt.
Jay or Alexis has an answer to that one. I know that Hannah wasn't in that circumstance.
I answered the last question, so if you want to get this one, Alexis.
Alexis, can you answer the question? Did you hear the question?
Yeah, I was actually at a different school when I came back. So if you were at the same school that you were at when you returned, I would just say it was hard to see my friends like graduating and doing stuff, but because I was technically in the same grade when I came back, because of doing my 2 years together, I didn't experience that.
I on the other hand, so similar to Alexis, I didn't try to transfer credits. The U.S. is kind of notoriously difficult for transferring credits, too. So I actually stayed behind the year, and so I graduated with the class that was below me. And I mean, it wasn't too different. I was still like in the same programs I would have been in beforehand, and it was just new kids that I hadn't been used to, but it wasn't because of the pandemic. There wasn't a lot of like in-person learning anyways, so I never really got too close to that class, but I was still able to finish the year out. It was just, there was nothing that could be done about it.
Thank you. Natalia, do you have any questions?
So one question I have is, when you came back from your exchange, did anybody remember you? Did anyone forget about you? Did anybody notice that you were gone?
maybe Hannah can answer that one, because I think coming back in a pandemic, everyone might feel forgotten and not noticed.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say I was not very great about communicating with people back home when I was on exchange, just because, you're in this new world and you're overwhelmed and you're trying to focus on, the relationships there in your host country. But even though I probably wasn't the best and should have put more, effort into communicating back home, when I got home, I was, greeted with everybody was so happy to see me and everybody wanted to hear stories. And, when you come back from exchange, you have so many stories to tell and you just did something really, really cool and interesting that everybody wants to hear about it. So people will definitely remember you.
Thank you. Luke, any questions?
So I've talked with a few other exchange students, and they've said that they were like gradually losing their ability to speak in their native tongue or language. Did you experience that?
Yes and no. Like, coming back, I could still hold, like, a conversation normally, but there was, like, quite a few things, that I would forget the word for. Like, I think at one point, like, my friend and I had gotten some, like, drinks, and they, like, it was, in another language, and they were pointing at the fruit, and they're like, oh, you had that in Thailand, like, what's it called? And I just full-on blanked, and I'm like, I could tell you the word in Thai. I know that won't help you anything. And so I had to sit there, and I had to, like, use Google Translate to, like, go from Thai back to English to figure out what this fruit was called. And it was just a guava. And I'm just like, so I couldn't remember guava in English, but I could remember it was farang in Thai, so.
Of your brain being rewired. Isabel, any question?
Yeah, so one of my questions was, what's something that you took from your host family that you still apply to your life today, if you have any?
Alexis, you want to answer that one?
Yes, so my last host family was my favorite just because my host mom and host dad they were so welcoming. And with my last two host dads, one of them didn't speak English, and so he hadn't really like spoken to me, which was fine because I was busy. And then my second host dad worked out of town, so I didn't really see him. But my last host dad was just super kind, super funny and boisterous, and he really greeted me into his life like I was another daughter, because his own daughter was away on exchange. And I think that's something really cool. A lot of kids have really hard host families to deal with, and some have really great ones. And I think that as you're going on exchange and you're entering these people's lives, especially in other countries, they usually have to host someone when one of their kids is gone. So for all of my host families, I was kind of taking like their kid's spot in the family. And so just definitely a sense of like I took from my host dad that everyone is welcome. Like there's always a seat at the table for people, and like a hearty laugh can make people feel really included. And so that was one of the biggest things I took away from my last host dad.
Thank you. Well, this conversation has gone by quickly. We're more or less out of time. I do appreciate Alexis's comments about host families, because our club does not limit host families to families that are sending kids out. Any family could volunteer to be a host family, and because we place students in 3 different host families through the year, we need lots of them. So if you're interested in hosting some great kids from around the world, let me or Jerry know, and we can help arrange for you to be host parents for Youth Exchange. But let's give a hand to our really brave students.
Thank you all very much. That's terrific. I'm always amazed and impressed when we see students, when we hear a lot of bad things and you realize how many great students there are out there. And I also think about when I was their age, I could barely tie my shoes. So having them go forward, this is terrific. Thank you all very much. And in your name, there will be a book placed at one of the community centers in appreciation for your appearing today. And next week, we have Frank Blethyn, We'll be speaking about the future of independent journalism. Should be a really interesting program. As you all know, this is a very major topic all around the country, and especially here. So with that, we are adjourned.